Welcome to the Red Light Exposé podcast.
We are an international grassroots survivor-led circle.
Our goal is to counter the growing acceptance of sex work ideology.
We aim to raise awareness of the harms of commercializing sex,
meaning prostitution, porn, stripping, and BDSM.
Through honest, in-depth conversations,
we elevate voices often ignored and silenced.
Together, we're challenging stereotypes and dismantling myths.
We envision a healthier, safer society, especially for women and girls.
We appreciate your company on this journey.
Welcome back to the Red Light Exposé podcast. Today it's me, Elly, an activist against sexual exploitation in Germany, and with me are...
Åsbogård. I am a political scientist, a lecturer. That's me.
And Sybil Jo. I'm a mom of 4, survivor of 15 years in the sex industry in the rural southern USA.
I forgot my kids. I have 2 kids.
Oh, yeah.
And I've spent 16 years in the industry, and well, yeah.
Right, and I haven't been in the industry myself, but I grew up in a country where it's everywhere in your face over here in Germany. Very blatant. What's coming to mind now? Right now, my younger brother is going through his graduation ceremony. And one thing we do every year for the people graduating high school is like a school carnival, just for the graduates. And every day for 1 week has a different theme. Back when I was in school, which is now 9 years ago, there would be normal themes like childhood heroes or historic personalities, but we'd also have one theme every year called hookers and pimps. And I'm not kidding. We would have even some of the teachers dress up as pimps with fur coats and sunglasses and bling bling, and boys and girls in fishnet stockings walking around the halls. I will never forget this, and I know it's not unique to my school. This is a phenomenon across the country. And so I was asking my brother, are they doing this at your school? And he was like, they changed it to nightlife. But some people are like, nightlife, I'll interpret that as, the not politically correct version. But this year at his school, they totally canceled it. I didn't have to show up at his school to protest or something.
That is, frightening, but also very interesting. I wrote about this a couple of, it was probably a year ago now, just how the word pimp has been so positively derived by media that you can actually do a pimp and hose party like they did in Stockholm. I think it was a year ago. And celebrities, especially one couple, they dressed out their kid as a prostitute who was like 10.
Oh my God.
Also all kinds of troubles with this. But for me, it's mainly how the media culture is using the word pimp as to facilitate some kind of positive image of a man. And if you say, I don't agree with that, well, just look at pimp my house, pimp my car. It's something positive. It's something that you do to almost glitter something out. When we know what a pimp is, how pimping really is, it's frustrating how we have an endless imagination when it comes to coming up with negative words for women and girls. But when it comes to, the few words that should be negative for men, for example, pimp, is, immediately transformed into something positive.
I'm so depressed hearing, because my question would have been can you imagine people doing that in Sweden? And then you go, we did that recently. And adults who should know better, I can be slightly forgiving of naive teenagers. I have to say it's the job of the adults, I think, to step in and say, you're 17, 18, 19 now. We're not going to do this. But right, like I mentioned, my school teachers were participating. It's so depressing to hear that that's possible. That's a thing that people do in Sweden for their private entertainment or semi-public, celebrities. I guess media, press was there. Ugh.
Yeah, trying to remember what it was, but it was some kind of party just for ABC celebrities. It was not like a public event where, everyone was welcome, but it was still, just showing how far we have to go when it comes to really showing what we're talking about when we're using these words and these terms. We seem to agree on what a hoe is, or what, hooker or prostitute or whatever you want to call it. But still, it lacks so much of the analysis of power and violence.
Listening to your story, I don't know if you were like seeing my response. I'm just like, listen, this is a story about it. And then you got to the part in the school, hookers and pimps, and coming from where I come from, everything is very under the rug. Everything is very behind closed doors. It's there, but you don't talk about it in public. And I'm sitting here thinking, is this what my grandmother warned me about? This is what my grandma was afraid about. And going back to the political homelessness, and the women on the left and the right, and the way that we're played off of each other, and I can look at the things now as an older woman that, when I was a teenager, and I could see my mother, who was more conservative than me, but still far less conservative than her parents, and then my grandmother, and I can see their fears and their ways of trying to address those fears. I don't know, and then I feel like you have women on the left going like, oh, those right-wing women, they're just clutching their pearls, they're scared of nothing, ha ha ha. And then you tell me that in elementary school I was recruited into prostitution in college, and that feels just like, oh my God, they just came to the lollipop factory, and got the children. Our grandmothers weren't crazy. They were responding to something, that was happening, and that blows my mind.
It's this whole thing of trying to find balance as a society where completely clear abstinence only education is harmful and kids will experiment, and it has all kinds of risks. But like the opposite, which I wouldn't say is the norm across Germany. Our sex ed is it's putting a condom on a banana and that's about it. But some schools, in the uber liberal big cities, there have been reports of them like actually, romanticizing prostitution to their students. There was one widely reported case. I'll look it up so people can check it out for themselves, where students were asked to design the perfect brothel. I don't know what age. I want to assume, older teenagers, but it doesn't matter. We want to find the balance, talking about sex openly, honestly, getting kids the right information, the emotional precarity and intelligence that you need to address around it, but not romanticize abusive systems, not, be so open-minded that your brain falls out.
How influenced do we think that sex ed has become by porn and the porn industry in general? Because everyone says the same thing. We got taught to put on a condom. I know that it's in both interests to use a condom. Why am I the one to do it? Why am I being taught to put on a condom? There's no sex education that teaches a man about different contraceptions for women. There's no way they're going to teach a man how to insert something in a vagina.
Like a diaphragm?
Yeah, like a diaphragm. Or, to run to the pharmacy and get her shit, There's no one teaching boys and men about that. So why am I being taught how to put on a condom? Am I going to do it? When you have two hands by yourself, like on your own, I can't do it. I'm 39. I can put on a condom. But why am I, as a 15-year-old, being taught to do that? Are the men not able to put on them themselves? Am I their slave? Am I there to serve them? Do you see what I'm getting with this? We start at a very early age to teach girls that we, in sexual situations, in situations of intimacy, we are supposed to serve men, not the other way around. So I'm asking you, how much do you think the porn industry have influenced sex ed?
Well, and you can say the same. And oh gosh, this always happens to me where I remember things and I can't remember where I saw this, and I'll remember it later. And but same thing with the medical industry. They have doctors coming in to learn about the female body. I mean, I'm sure it's cleaned up now, but they would use pornography. This is the thing, it's the interconnection, it's all connected, the education system.
The blatant disrespect of women. I know what you want to say. The blatant disrespect of women and girls.
Disrespect doesn't even touch it.
Can I tell you about a case in Sweden when it comes to doctors and doctor students? When it comes to that, now this is some 20 years ago, but it's not that long ago that a case emerged in Sweden where reports were from one of the hospitals that girls and women who came in to get abortion. This was the time when we didn't do the pill as much as we do the abortion pill. So you had scrapings, and when you got scrapings, when you had an abortion, you were put to sleep. So they would bring in doctor students who would, feel and insert themselves within the female without consent, without being told about it, for medical research or, getting it. And when that comes up, they were like shocked, the doctors, that this was a thing. Like, why are you protesting this? They were there to be, put to sleep. They were in anesthesia. And when we said it's violation, you violate them, they were confused. Like, why is this wrong? And it's just everywhere. The lack of respect for female bodily autonomy, that is mind-blowing.
I like I said, I think lack of respect or disrespect, that almost is just like, there's something even more malevolent to it. It's sexual abuse, right? And so what does sexual abuse have to do with maintaining institutions? I think it has something to do with the way people respond to sexual abuse. When you keep a group of people in this state of complex trauma, I've heard of that too, with the medical students using unconscious women, and they're like, oh well, she's, it's the same thing. Oh, she's drunk behind the dumpster, right? You
Oh
didn't
yeah,
feel it. What's the problem? But actually, that causes a much deeper and more complex level of trauma, because the body knows what happened, but the mind can't make a story out of it. And so it gets stuck in this loop. And, the more sedated you are, the more dissociated you are, the harder it is to kind of get those pieces back together.
exactly.
But yeah, I think it's not just disrespect. I think there's something strategic almost about it.
And we need to have a historian on sometime to teach us about the history of gynecology, because this will overlap so much. Because this is my, I'm not a historian. This is very basic, simplified summary, right? That historically, actually, the oldest profession for women is not prostitution, but midwifery. But as we know, that is something that got pushed out by the male-dominated medical model down the line, that men took over the field of women's health and women's intimate health and women's reproduction. If I'm not misinformed, that was one of the motivating factors intermingled with the persecution of, unruly women during the literal witch hunts historically, like medicine women, healer women, midwives. And if women need one thing to radicalize them, I mean, the tools we still use when we go in for a gynecological checkup, most women say they're uncomfortable. Why are they cold? Why are they metal? Why do we have to sit like that, spread our legs like that? Everything, the poses we have to be in, the tools, and then the staff, which thanks to feminism, women can study medicine, but there's still plenty of men in that profession. It's not necessarily always about the individual doctor, male or female, and we know there are terrible female gynecologists as well. Even if they are, empathetic, kind, well-educated, well-meaning, everything that the system that they've learned from, the setup, like I mentioned, the tools, the setting, everything was not created by women or for women, has so many flaws in it, right? That it all needs to be revolutionized, essentially. And now I'm thinking of this one woman, I think she's going by Mill Hilly or something on Twitter. You might have heard of her. I think she wrote a book called Give Birth Like a Feminist or something. So I know there are women working on this, and we will get them on here. And the thing that I was going to mention, because that's what our podcast is about, sexual exploitation, prostitution. Women in prostitution are one of the groups that are historically experimented on by doctors, pseudo researchers in so many different ways. So we'll get all that from an actual expert sometime.
Talking about the male gynecologists, my first daughter was born in the hospital, and I had my second two at home because it was a terrible experience. And the first thing, I get in there and they tell me that the midwife I had been seeing my whole pregnancy wasn't available. I don't know, she wasn't on call, she wasn't. And so I was going to have the doctor who just happened to be on the rounds, the male OB. And I had specifically gone to an all-female practice, but I was 19 and in labor, and he wanted me to have an enema. The nurse, the sweet nurse, she took that one. She was like, "You don't have to do that. I won't make you do that," because I was crying. And finally, they did get a woman from my practice. She was awful. I hadn't met her before. It was my first time meeting her. She like just very forcefully coached me to push. So thanks for the hemorrhoids. And then after my daughter was born and it was time for me to birth my placenta, she pulled my placenta. She jerked my placenta out by the cord. And at the time I was 19, I was just like a hillbilly. I didn't know any better, but I did know better because it hurt. And then going on to have, like I said, my second two at home, I did a lot of self-education, and I realized how dangerous that could have been for me.
Yeah, very.
So yeah, even the women who are in the institutions, the only way to get up in those institutions is to go by the book. Mary Daly, I don't know if y'all are familiar with her concept of Sado Ritual Society. Women have been talking about this for as long as we've been talking, and we've been writing about it every time they let us be literate. But yeah, the like you were saying, going to the doctor and sitting in this way and putting on this gown and exposing yourself, it's all like really ritualized sexual abuse, isn't it? And again, like I asked myself, what purpose does ritualized sexual abuse serve? And I think this is why it's so hard to break this barrier of having the conversation about prostitution, because in order to have that conversation, you have to have a conversation about a lot of other things, right?
Yes.
And in fact, I now that I'm remembering, when I was in it, I made that connection. I was like, well, I said, I'm very clinical about things. I can handle the doctor really well. I can shut off this kind of part of me about bodies. So when I get into this situation with this man and his body, I become like a nurse, right? I'm viewing it in this quote unquote professional way, but really I'm dissociating. But I associated that with my experiences in medicine too. Like, that's all. It's all connected.
Yes, it is. It is all connected. I have, so many horrible, horrible stories when it comes to meeting, doctors and whatever. But I think that the most important thing I can like boil it down to, even as a Black woman, I'm a Black woman, but I can see how it intersects with just being a woman. We have had big debates about, how Black women are being seen as not feeling pain, but I know that there is a woman agency to that question. It's a societal belief that women don't feel pain. And I remember reading a book long time ago where a rape victim came in and she got sewn. I don't remember the name of the book. I'm sorry. But one of the things that I just took with me was that she was sewn from ripping from the rape without anesthesia, without anything to like take away the pain. And you think that that shouldn't happen. Like, how awful is that? And then I go in and I have my second child. And I get like this cooling spray between my legs after the birth. And she starts sewing, and I'm like, this hurts. And she takes another stitch, and I'm like, this really, really hurts. I was stitched with my first child too. And I didn't feel anything. I was completely numb down there. And I didn't have the same midwife or same nurse or whatever. But the thing was like, so she just expects me not to feel pain. She doesn't listen to what I actually say or what I actually show with my entire body and screams in pain. She goes with what she thinks is right, because obviously I'm lying or what. The medical world is a part of the society, and in the broad society all over the world, it's believed that women can just sort themselves out. If they're in pain, they're going to get used to it. They can just handle it and should not be taken seriously. And that's why you don't have to really respect women at all. It's so many more layers to this that I'm saying that right now, but it's an actual problem. And as women and as girls, trusting the system, trusting the medical professionals is really hard. And I want to say one other thing. We talk a lot about, changing words or not using words. And I'm all for that because I'm Black. I don't want to hear the N word. I shrill. But still, we have a word like hysterectomy, which we know comes from, a negative, I would say, maybe not abusive, but still abusive system that locked women in and killed them in a lot of ways. Lobotomy, forced sterilization and whatever. We use a word that is like directly connected to that kind of abuse. And I'm keeping asking every time that comes up. I'm like, but why don't they just change it? It should be just easy. It's an offensive word to women. Well, what do that connotate when you say that word? That we're hysterical.
And that's the keyword hysteria is making me think of another woman that I want to invite on the podcast. Do you guys know Dr. Jess Taylor? She's also a survivor herself, and now I think forensic psychologist. I hope I'm not getting that professional description wrong. She has written books about the victim blaming of women and girls who are survivors of male violence. And one of her more recent works is called Sexy But Psycho, which is about the pathologization of traumatized women and girls. The way she traces in the book is it used to be you get diagnosed with hysteria, which is like the womb wandering around your body, some pseudoscientific nonsense. If women are upset because they live in a highly restrictive, highly violent society, then that turned into histrionic personality disorder, and now it's called borderline. Mm-hmm. And, again, I'm not a psychologist. Like I can't make any kind of final judgment if there is somewhere a genetic component to some of this, but like the way she presents us, the evidence is very strong that at least the main part of what we call women's mental health issues is trauma responses. That they don't, the violence isn't acknowledged, and then when you go into treatment, you get medicalized, you get lots of pills, rather than addressing, is your home situation safe? What was your childhood like? Is your job situation safe? Are you financially stable? All of those things. Is your relationship healthy? Women are more likely to get heavy medication with all kinds of side effects that also have some dubious research under them. And again, we'll get an expert on to say this, more precisely with sources, just recounting what I read. And one of the things that stood out that I looked up recently, because I was talking to a friend who's on her way to becoming a therapist, that I checked, and this is like official NHS, National Health Service of Great Britain data. This is about the forced sedation of patients in psychiatric institutions. The biggest group of people who get it are teenage girls. Teenage girls are, in Great Britain, 7 times more likely to be forcefully sedated than a teenage boy, even though you'd think, isn't a teenage boy significantly more dangerous to staff because of his physical strength, probably as an older teen? Why is it the teenage girls? And then as you go up with the age groups, it's still disproportionately women, though it's most extreme for the young women. So we as a society are just like, we have a major issue with female distress in general, and especially that of young women and girls. We don't want to see it. We don't want to deal with it. We want to shut it down. We feel threatened by it. We're scared of it. We don't know how to deal with it. And, we'll get an expert on this, but I'm sure you both have plenty of things to say.
It kind of feels like when I talk to people about this, in like you're saying, like, nobody wants to talk about it. Like they'll kind of acknowledge the subject. Okay, yeah, yeah, it's very terrible. We hate that. Move on. I wonder if the problem feels too big. We have this kind of existential dread of something that we can't fix. And speaking of Dr. Jess Taylor, I was listening to her podcast this week, and she was kind of talking about
the Wandering Womb podcast for people who want to look it up. Sorry to interrupt. I just want people to hear it so they can find it.
Actually, the one I was listening to though was the Wandering Room was great. That's her and her wife. She also has her own thing now. I think it's like Dr. Just talks about stuff or something like that. But she was talking about this problem that we have in mental health or psychology, that we actually and in the justice system, like combined, we don't actually know how to stop this violence. And that's the thing that nobody wants to say. So we tell little girls, don't wear tank tops. Don't go down that street. Go down that street. Don't talk to that man. Talk to that man. Because we don't want to look at them in the eye and tell them, I don't know how to stop him from hurting you.
That is a very good point. I also want to say that we have just now, while we're speaking, a big debate in Sweden. Well, not so much as a debate, more as a newly risen controversy within the governments, and they're hosting a lot of homes for kids that are criminal or mentally ill. They have those homes, and recently it was shone a light on that they would put girls that had no aggression problems, no criminal history, on these homes with boys and men who have committed sexual offenses, are psychologically unstable, to say the least. I am so happy to say this. They have started their own groups now. They are advocating, the girls who have left these homes are advocating and talking about the abuse that they've lived through during these homes. And we're now starting to talk about ending these kind of placements. You have a 15-year-old girl who doesn't want to go to school at home. You send her to one of these homes. I have no number now, but I can find it. But how many rapes that are committed from just the personnel working on in these homes towards these girls? You have illegal put downs on the floor. You have beatings. You have so much. And I just want to say that when I was institutionalized, when I was 15 going on 16, I was institutionalized for 5 months. The amount of medicine I was given for being a rape survivor, for being a child in prostitution, escalated from a couple of pills to get me through the night to when I wrote in my diary, I could hardly hold a pen. You should see my penmanship. And I said, I had to write it down. I had to, if something happened to me, they needed to know. I had 21 pills and 7 different pills. So it was 21 in one setting, like during the day, from 7 different kinds of pills. Until one doctor came and said, who I didn't usually have, said that, okay, so this is dangerous. I don't know who said that this was okay, but we need to lower that down. And immediately after leaving what we call BUP in Sweden, which is a child psychiatric ward, I went straight into drug abuse, just straight in. And the people who have the audacity to say, why? Well, you've been heavily medicated for 5 months as a child, and you come out with this horrible notion that you're not a victim, you're a pain in the ass menace. I was called promiscuous. I was told to stay away from the boys at the home. I was raped, I was abused, I was sold, and this was how they treated me for 5 months, and heavily, medicated. So once I got out in a society that I was told would not accept me, you look for ways to be accepted, and you look for ways to escape. And another thing, when we're talking about this, and this is something I hear from several other survivors who come from substance abuse. When you go in and you seek psychiatric counsel and it says in your form that you have a substance abuse, there are several medications that are not suitable for you, who are being time and time again almost forced on, especially I would say sexual assault survivors that I've spoken to. And that is scary in of itself, that they still try to pull you back into medical abuse. Because if, what the rules say, at least in Sweden, and I could, imagine that it says the same thing in your countries and counties, that if you have a substance abuse, this is the pills they can offer, you can't offer this and this and this. And this is the law. This is, and if not the law, then it's at least a strong policy, because they know what's going to happen. And when doctors continuously overrides that and offers that anyway, or say that this is the only answer, that's another form of abuse. And as you said, it's like they don't want to deal with it. But also, when you're a woman or a girl, you have an inch in this society, and you have to operate within that inch. So you're not even allowed not to smile. I had a friend who was actually put out of work. She was called into the office, and they told her that, yeah, we like to have you here, but, we feel like it doesn't work out. And she said, why? And they're like, well, you're not happy enough. And she's like, what, you're saying I should smile more? I come on time every day. I do the work like everyone else here. Yeah, but we feel that you're a bit of sour, like you don't smile. Of course, if she would have been a part of the union, they could have done something. But she's 23, she's very young, she just felt like, I need to get away from this place. But talking about the inch that we are allowed to operate before we are considered difficult or menace to society is a joke, considering looking at them, all the boys and men, and that's how we later divide the resources in helping. Boys and men in trouble will get all the resources. We're not saying that it's helping or that it's makes the world different. I'm not saying that they're more effective. I'm saying cost-wise, money-wise, there is a big difference in how much money that goes to women and girls and boys and men. So I think if we tie the knot around what I'm supposed to say here is that we, again, a lot of layers, but also we don't have the same, still we don't have the same right to be a human in our own society and to be valued as such. We are still very much beneath men. So every time they tell us you can't go there because you have a short skirt and you can't drink and everything, it's not just holding us back. It's not just systematically chains on us. It's also telling the other 50% you have the right to do this and this if she does that. So it's also giving liberties and almost, I would say, incent to men.
Yeah, I call it trauma training. And going back, I know I'm like kind of keep looping back around to what is this ritual of abuse? What does it accomplish? And it trains us into certain behaviors, right? That just so happen to end up serving someone else.
We want to take a brief moment to thank you for your listenership. As an independent volunteer collective, our episodes are only made possible because of donations from people like you. Please visit our website, www.redlightexposé.com, and click the donate button. Your support is greatly appreciated. And now, back to the episode.
Listening to your experience in the institution and the drugs that they were pushing on you, it made me think of, so you got this kid, it made me think of like pushers on the street, right? With drug dealers who are like, hey kid, and they get a younger kid and start giving it to them for free. But it's almost even more cruel because you have the added gaslighting of then once you're away from that, they tell you, oh no, you have a disease called addiction that comes from inside of you, has nothing to do with, what the people who we ideologically, if we're all talking about, we're in mental health, quote unquote, right? So anybody who says that they are a mental health professional, they have to toe a certain line. They have to treat you a certain way and treat the situation a certain way that totally erases their own participation in creating these patterns. It's really cruel. It's really the way that a manipulative abuser will treat their abuse victim, right? Get them hooked on something and then yell at them for being hooked on it. Or an abusive partner. I've heard of this a lot. He'll live off of your prostitution money, and then when you get in an argument, well, you're just a whore. right? But it's at every level, that we think of that as being really trashy, abusive behavior, but it's at these highest levels of the way that we think our society is run.
And it's so depressing that is the system where women go for help. Like, women are running from an abusive partner, family, pimp, poverty being the pimp, and the place they go to get help, there's a significant risk that what we just talked about of getting re-traumatized. I mean, it's the same with the court system. I mean, I was having obviously lots of thoughts while both of you were talking. One is just the whole idea, and again, this is where I'm sure Dr. Taylor will be able to tell us more. Why are these institutions, especially with the super vulnerable traumatized women and girls, why are they not sex segregated? And I have read this explanation. I'd love to put it to her and get her evaluation. That it used to be that sex, again, talking about what our grandmothers said, was sensible. In the past, there was more sex segregation than there is today. That was bad for women because it kept women out of opportunities, right? Professional associations, positions of power were women either weren't included or had second-rate accommodations. And my understanding is it's the same with these institutions, that they were second rate for women. And the fusion of the male and female institutions was sold as, well, now women are not getting second rate because they're in the same ones as the men. But with the outcome today that I personally know, multiple women who have been in such institutions, like you mentioned, the woman is there because she's traumatized from rape. The man is there because they can't get him to stop raping. How are those two people in the same setting getting similar treatments? Like, makes absolutely no sense.
So I want to share a story from something that happened to a friend of one of our fellow hosts, Sabrina from New Zealand. And she shared something really heavy that connects to everything we've been talking about. So she had a friend who went to a 12-step program, right? So a friend who was trying to get out of prostitution. And in that program, there was a man who talked about his lowest point, what he experienced when he realized that he needed to fight his addiction. And in his case, he went to a section of street prostitution and paid to exploit a woman. And he said he looked for the cheapest one he could find so that he could afford her. And he described the woman he exploited as gross, and he called her a whore and probably disease-riddled. So hearing that in a place where she was trying to heal had a really, really heavy impact on Sabrina's friend. I think pretty obviously it made her feel deeply dehumanized, that this was his lowest point, but women like her were even lower. She was already feeling isolated, but this made her feel even more so. And the group facilitator never asked, what was that woman that the man exploited? Did he ever think about how she was doing, right? Supposedly these groups are about accountability. Like what you did in your addiction, what you may have done to other people. Not here, no challenge of the wording, of whore. The impact this had on Sabrina's friend was actually so bad that she went back to prostitution. She left the program, and it took her years to try again, to leave. And she was only able to do that in one-on-one counseling. And also because she later, she developed cancer, which she fought successfully for many years, but it eventually took her life at only age 41. So if she had been able to leave sooner, if she had a space that was safer, she may have been able to make it out and live longer. Like, this really is a life and death matter. And it's important for people to understand this is not just about overt physical abuse or targeted abuse of the survivor. Well, we do know that there are men who go to 12-step programs to predate on women struggling with addiction, but it's also, it is about something like the language of participants, right? Being degrading to women in general or women in prostitution specifically. The fear that unempathetic or creepy men might be around, it leads women who really desperately need help to self-exclude. And so what we need a return to sex segregation in sensitive spaces like that, right? Sure, there are sensitive men in those spaces, but it just takes one asshole to ruin it. And we need those women-only recovery spaces to be funded properly. We need to move away from the medical model, like medicalizing trauma, like we mentioned, the over-prescribing of medication. And there are people working on this. There are pioneers of this approach, so we will get them on. But yeah, that's something I found really important, and I wanted to highlight it. Yeah.
A few years ago, I was in AA for about a year, and I found it useful, but I definitely experienced what you're talking about, and this tone deafness, or this, we're having a different conversation. And I ended up just going to women's meetings. Luckily, the place where I was going was a pretty large, like, recovery center, and they had some women's meetings, and I made some really great female friends. And but I had no patience for the mixed meetings, and especially these guys love to talk about, like, I realized that everything that was wrong in my life was because of the decisions I made. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, that's probably true. You kind of sound like an asshole. And that's the spiritual awakening. And they're saying, like, when you can come to this spiritual awakening where you realize that all your problems are your fault, then you can get into recovery. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's, even I was in a bad place, and I was there for help, and I was like, that doesn't sit right with me. That doesn't feel right to me. But like you said, we're coming from, this is not the same group of people. We don't have the same experiences. And so the solutions aren't going to be the same. What's that book about, what was it? The Invisible Woman, or about how everything is designed based on male studies. And so even like seatbelts, we're more likely to die because seatbelt doesn't made for us.
Musical instruments, power tools.
Power tools. Don't even get me started on power tools.
Her name is Caroline Criado Perez.
And it's also manufactured to suit right-handed people. I am left-handed, and it is awful to live in this society. Why? So I'm Black. I am a survivor. I'm a single mom, and I'm left-handed. Can someone just, yes? Can someone just, please show me some love?
My mother was left-handed, and my daughter's left-handed, so I feel your pain.
Great kids. Yeah. Actually, when I went to school, the first proper class you went to when you were 7 years old, on the first meeting with the teacher, me and my mom sitting there. And we're talking 1992, something like that. So it's not that long ago. The teacher actually looked at my mom and said, "Oh, your daughter is left-handed. Do you want us to change that?" And my mother, being a teacher as well, looked at her and said, "No. Do we still do that?"
In the 70s, they hit my mom.
Yeah.
They did that was in the 70s. I can't.
This is the 1992 in Sweden. Yeah.
That's bonkers.
Yeah, it's bonkers. But just talking about what you both talked about, I'm reaching the point of talking about another important thing, and it's marginalization. It goes to everything that we're talking about, because I feel sometimes that it's really hard to explain marginalization, because in effect you have money for your rent because you're in prostitution, and you have money. You're like, why are you not a part of the society? And like, because in every aspect I am the lowest of lowest in people's eyes, and they're like, oh, but then we should change the stigma of being in prostitution. And it's like, that's not it. That is not even a side piece of it. It's the way I'm being treated by everyone in the society, not just Johns. Yes, you said the AA meetings. I talked about being hospitalized, being institutionalized, meeting therapists and everyone in between who are consistent in that a woman in prostitution is a fallen woman. She is beyond help. She is beyond, anything. And I don't know, it's sometimes that's really brings me down still.
What you're saying about marginalization and this ending of stigma thing, to me, it kind of seems like in the stigma people, what they mean is in the stigma for happy hookers. So as long as you're playing the part, like, they just want you to keep playing the part for them, just like you do for the Johns, just like extend it out, which I'm like,
yeah,
nah, y'all, I get paid to pay this, but like, you have to pay me by the hour if you want to hear the fake thing.
Yes, exactly.
It's okay to be out in public and to be the happy hooker, but they don't want to see the other side of it. They don't want to see you when you're in depression. They don't want to see you when you're having crazy mood swings. They don't want to see your economic deprivation. And if you let them see any of that, then you're not taking responsibility for your own life, and you're putting your problems on other people, and like, kind of, I call it the fire, when my life kind of Jenga fell apart because I lost a lot of things because we moved around a lot. So I always say, oh, I wish I had that photo album, but I lost it in the fire. But during that time, I was evicted from my house. I was living out of the car with my kids. They didn't know we were homeless. We were staying at free campsites up in the mountains where we like to vacation. So we just spent like 2 months. We homeschooled, and as far as they were concerned, this was a normal kind of thing we would do in the summer, and it's an adventure. They didn't know that like my life was falling apart. And as that was happening, all of my friends and who I thought I was building support systems with and hand selecting this group of what I thought was a community, they were dropping like flies. They would answer my phone call, but I always needed something, right? And nobody wants to be around that person, and nobody wants to be that person. And then so, that just crushes your self-esteem. The wider society sees us the same way that the Johns see us in a lot of ways, and want the same things from us, this performance, this, kind of good time gal. And they really encourage that, and they support that persona.
Really important things you're talking about right now, Joe. I'm just recognized so much. When you're a happy hooker, you always got money. You never talk about the problems. You never talk about, the real issues in your life, so the violence. And when you do, no one really wants to hear that. I have had therapists, and I say therapists, like more than one, who has started crying when I was asked to talk about my experiences. So you have this happy hooker image, and you have all these so-called friends. And when that life disappears, and you're a person in need of help, I call it the beach syndrome. Have you seen The Beach, the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio? It's kind of like
I know the plot. Yeah, I know the premise. Yeah.
Yes. So in that movie, they all live in go to a party beach. It's like paradise, almost described. And it is paradise until one of I think he even was Swedish, one of the surfers gets bitten by a shark. They try to treat him, but, they don't have any real medical experience. So he just, moans and groans because he's in pain and he's infected. And what they do is they just carry him out into the jungle, to let life sort itself out. And I call it the beach syndrome because that's what I experienced.
Yeah.
Going from being the happy hooker, you always got money, always could go out partying. When you leave that life and you actually need help, you're just being carried out in the woods, out of sight, out of mind. For 4 years now, I've been writing on my book. 3 years, sorry. No money, I have financial support from my parents, thank God, but you're always poor, and you're always, you never have enough for either food or invoices, like constant balancing, and being the one who have to ask your friends, and seeing how people who are really well off, really well off, saying like, oh, but I can't help you, the mortgage. And it's like, the mortgage, you make like stupid money, like real money. So me asking for like, so we can buy food here is like nothing, but sharing, no. So you start thinking, oh, but all all the time partying out in the clubs, me buying all the liquor.
When you said you've always got money, and I was like, yep, and you're buying the drinks.
You buying the drinks, you buying,
You like that.
Yes, they love that. And that is the, the kind of friends that I just shut the door on. Have a happy life. I wish you no harm. But that is, for me, toxic behavior, because I agree. Like, I can't really imagine how it is to live in a third world country, out in the streets. I was born in what was considered a third world country, and we don't talk about third world. I'm using that because I want to paint the image, not that I think that it's a correctly used term. But I was born in Colombia. I was born in a shanty town. But I'm brought up in Sweden. I can't imagine how it's like to have that. But when it comes to your friends that you can see face to face, like, God, I need help. And say like, no, because it's too, I don't know if I say painful for them, or like they don't want to see you in pain, or they don't want to see you suffer. So they make up excuses and they don't want to share their wealth. Let's be honest. They don't want to share their wealth with a common whore. They have rich friends they can spend money on.
Well, and I think they have these ideas of oh, well, if I share with you, you're going to take from me and waste it. Like there are these biases, right? These ideas that we have about why hookers are hookers, how we got here, and what our values are. And even the people who are like our friends, I've had to learn over and over and over again. And I don't know if I'm done learning the lesson. I hope so, that
Yeah,
just because a woman smiles at me doesn't mean she's my friend.
exactly.
And talking about people who have something complaining, I was working for a woman once, and I was managing her small business, and she was having trouble making payroll and complaining about troubles with the business. As we're standing looking out the window as they like install her underground pool, she's complaining about how she's having a hard time paying me $12 an hour. Like I say, more money than they got cents. Like, it's not, I'm not even mad at you for having it, but do you know how stupid you sound right now?
I had a friend at university who called her parents up and asked for more money because they paid her way all the way to school, which was, you don't have to do that in Sweden. You can get student loan and you don't have to pay in tuition, but they pay, because she wanted to have a minimum of 10,000 Swedish kroners on her account because she didn't want to think about just whipping out her card. She didn't want to be worried. And I was like, I am currently selling myself to afford the transfer fee from Borås to Gothenburg just to go back and forth, because that is a kind of expensive card. I think it's like over 1,000. And you think that how different our life is, really. But, good for her. She grew up with parents who could do that. But yeah, it's disheartening almost with people like that.
I'm just wondering out loud if one of the components for this rejection, when someone's down, you find out who your real friends are, is also this horror that people feel of like, some part of them is like, it could actually also be me. And I cannot face the possibility that I too could stumble in life. We know that, for example, right, the addiction crisis with opioids, that happened to people who were just unlucky with their doctors, not to create a hierarchy of addiction, of like who's more deserving. I felt none of that. But I'm just saying, we know that attention started being paid to the opioid crisis because it was happening to middle-class people. But just as an example of things that people are like, oh, this can't happen to me. But then you see someone and some part of it relates to your own fear about falling through the safety, supposed or actual safety net of society. And you just can't deal with that. You can't cope with it. And I have encountered that a couple of times from women who are like, why do I need to know about prostitution? Like, that would never happen to me. I would never have to consider selling my body. What do you mean? Like, how would that ever happen? When I actually think most women are closer to that than they think they are. But it's like trying to create the separation between you and the person who's struggling to feel emotionally safe. Like, I could not be the person struggling with addiction. I could not be the person in prostitution. So I can sleep at night. That scenario is just light years away from me.
I think there's something also in women's mind. I think that maybe she can drag me down with her. It's almost like a superstitious, like contagious, like this is contagious in some way. If I identify too much with her, that could pull me down into. Or even really, like, again, going back to how this is at every level, women who haven't experienced the farthest end of the spectrum are still getting it from their fathers, their brothers, their cousins, their boyfriends, their husbands. And so in some way, us bringing attention to it really does drag them down into the part of them that has experienced that, right? They lock that part of themselves away. That you don't think about that. You don't talk about it. It's behind closed doors. Only me and my husband know about that. I want to stay in my real life out here where nobody knows what happens to me. But when these other women are talking about it, it pulls them into it. And they, nobody wants that. Of course, part of me almost like I kind of bounce back and forth between being really angry at, women who won't talk about this and just feeling so much compassion and like, God, she's surviving. She doesn't want to lose her mind. And that's really, it's like the connection between sexual abuse and madness. And I like the word madness. I think, it's a word that's been used for a long time in a lot of contexts to mean the same thing. It's what happens to women or the demons when the demons get into the woman through her vagina. That's a belief, because we know what happens to women who are sexually abused. They go mad. And I think you're right. Like, women know that we are like right on that edge. And women who have it together, they know they could fall off, and they think we could pull them off. The way I see it is they're actually, I see it from the outside, they're in it. They're like actually just, well, I've had friends tell me about their experiences with their husbands and, the maintenance sex or the get him in a better mood sex. And I'm like, that is prostitution. That's emotional. And I've done it in my relationships my whole life too. But society wide, there's a difference. That's the good kind. That's the legitimate kind.
And I just want to give a quick disclaimer so that people don't misconstrue my words, because I know, so we just talked about women who look the other way when people are struggling, especially other women. We know that there's also the problem of the helper syndrome in women and women sacrificing their lives to pull their entire families through crisis, friends, especially their male partners. So, like, I'm not saying every time someone's in crisis and comes to you, you must be there or you're a terrible person. Obviously, it depends super on the individual situation. There may be times when you do have to separate from someone who is dealing with drugs or violence, especially if it might make you relapse. It might trigger something in you. Like, that's a real scenario. So it's like, I acknowledge that complexity, although maybe it's probably fair to generalize. And we do have data on this in all kinds of contexts. The one that's coming to my mind right now is organ donation. Women donate way more organs to men than men do to women. So most of the female helper syndrome goes to men rather than other women. So as a generalization, we could probably have this takeaway of, women need to 100% have more solidarity with women. That does not mean you have to be up close with someone in a really dangerous situation, dealing with really dangerous people. There are times, obviously, when you need to pull back for your self-protection, and you're not everyone's therapist, but try and take a step back, look at it realistically. Can I help this person? Do I have the resources? Do I have the capacity? Or am I not doing this because of all the things we just talked about? Am I not facing something in my own relationship, my own life? Is it true that they could drag me down, or is that my paranoia? And it, not an easy task. It's super challenging. It sucks we have to do it so much. Like, I mean, I don't know a woman who isn't either herself a survivor of violence or has someone super close to her who was. And everyone goes into crisis. It's not pathological. That's a normal, understandable reaction. That's what Dr. Jess Taylor keeps saying. Like, the trauma reaction is normal. It's not sick. That's, if you are treated like less than nothing and you end up feeling like less than nothing, that's just logical. But yeah, Mally, I see you wanna get in on this.
Yes, I want to get in on this. Yes, I want to thank you both because you are shining a light on such an important issues. But I want to say this. We know now a lot more about being, codependent, and you being in an abusive relationship. Either you're a friend or you're a partner or whatever, and you give everything. And I just want to say, it's not the ones I'm talking about. It's not the ones you reach out for to help you, because you have friends. I have friends who is there for me. I have friends that I'm there for. And the problem is, for me, we're such hardwired as a society to diminish and look down on people asking for help that we tend to always find reasons not to. I don't know how to say this without sounding like a complete asshole, but I think I'm going to go out on a ledge here and say, I don't feel sorry for you if you have the means and you have the means to do other things. And if I ask you for like 200 kroner, what is that, $20 for food? I don't feel sorry for you. You say no, that's fine. You can move it along. Just know that you are hardwired to be more frustrated with me because I'm down on my luck, than you are when you see all these rich people making billions of dollars, abusing and using people, and you don't lift your ass to do nothing about it. You just accept because you happen to be on the good side of the society. I'm going to say this. It's not right. We're talking about as a whole society, not just people in prostitution, we're talking about homeless. What were we taught about homeless growing up? We were not supposed to give them money because they would only use it on alcohol or drugs. And if you're homeless, that is your problem. That is something you've done. Such bullshit crap. I saw some statistics not so long ago. This is actually about America, on how many vacant homes there were and how many people who were homeless. I can't cite the correct numbers, but I think it was something like 500,000 homes were vacant, and you had like 400,000 homeless people. We can help if you want to. That's not the issue here. The issue here is that we're hardwired as a society to push back on people asking for help and stigmatize them and telling them that they are falling on their own like luck. As you said, Jo, it's almost like they're talking about some mystical, like you can drag me down. I can't be in the head of everyone who says no. And I don't ever just ask women, because from running my Instagram account and knowing who is it that gives when you ask people to give, I don't ask to give, but asked to give for another survivor just yesterday. Who's giving? It's always women, and it's always women who can barely make it themselves. So when I'm saying I'm asking people for help, I'm asking people who have way more than they should have, maybe, and people who actually can afford it. And when you say, oh, you don't know if they can afford it, yes, I do know that they can afford it. They can afford $20. They just don't want to. That's the reality. One friend of mine, I'm not gonna rant about this, but one friend of mine, we had a talk just yesterday talking about people are now so used about hearing about billionaires that they have lost all sense about what that really is, how much money that really is. She said, Marley, if you would have 1 second for every million and count that in time, you would reach 11 and a half days in seconds. If you would have 1 billion and count that in time, you would have 11 and a half years. That's the difference. So we need to have an actual discussion. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about what you're talking about, Elly, because it's right. We need to talk about codependency. We need to talk about rushing to help when it's. But for the vast majority of people who need help, don't have someone to pull down and who are giving when they can't. They have no one. That's the reality.
Marley, you're brilliant, and this is so fun that we're all so geographically, and hear everything you're saying. I'm like, oh yeah, it's just like that here. It's just like that here. I don't know. Maybe growing up, I had this idea of Sweden that it would be. I don't know. Very clean. It always looks very clean on the television.
I can say it's very clean, but Swedes, when it comes to helping people, I just need to add this. Swedes have a very sad history of not being very helpful because they've been extremely poor. They've been extremely poor, and they've been extremely, this is not a large country for any of you. We haven't had that much, big cities. When people got old in Sweden, and this is not that long ago, we just pushed them out of cliffs. Like if you were old enough,
I saw
we
the
pushed them
movie.
up cliffs. Yeah, we did that.
There's a history in a bunch of countries of like sending old people in the forests to fend for themselves. A lot of these stories of like witches coming back, of like old women in the woods, was people who abandoned their grandparents or their grandmothers, especially.
Yeah, and we didn't even settle for the woods. We pushed them right off the cliff.
Right, they ain't coming back.
You know what? Grandpa dead. He dead now. I'm so sorry. No, this is horrible. But this was long enough ago, so there's no one alive today to witness or bear witness of this. But even so, if you look in recent years, when it comes to older people, we put them in homes way before any other country, dude. We call them poorhouses, like really just put them away from us. We didn't want to see. And so Sweden is a great country when it comes to a lot of things. But when it comes to, being social, talking about your field, I think we have the highest rates of suicide in Sweden in the world per capita.
Though to be fair, I have to say, isn't that also because of darkness?
Oh my God, you bring our weather and we took you into this country, lady. No, I'm kidding. We welcomed you with open arms. No.
I mean, I can list all the things I love about Sweden. I mean, I have to say, I've never felt that safe. I wasn't sexually harassed one single time about the 1 year that I lived in Sweden. Not once, which would happen to be like in southern Germany on the public transport, like regularly. I would at one point just always be watching out for it. Like, I have good things to say about the university system. I saw way more dads caring for their children, which I love to see. But the coldness and the darkness, and I know I was always writing in the trains, and it was saying, "Dricka du för mycket? Are you drinking too much?" Like addiction counseling, like everyone's and right, isn't it the high chocolate consumption, high caffeine consumption? And I think humans are not meant to live that far up north. I think that's a big. You know, all the people who go to Finland and then they, because of the like social security system, and they leave because of the weather, like that's a whole thing. So
I'm with you.
We're getting off topic, but yeah, I mean, I also learned that Sweden is some sort of paradise for women, and I mean, I'm not naive anymore, even though I personally liked a lot of things about it. As a woman, the weather just did kick my ass.
I call everything above Virginia the cold place. And I don't even bother. Someone will like say the name of somewhere in Canada, somewhere here. I'm like, no, it's all the cold place to me. Humans aren't meant to live there. I don't understand.
No. And I live in the rainiest city in Sweden. So we have rain, like proper vampire weather all year round. And then we have the cold. And everyone in Sweden pretty much is,
seasonally depressed.
I regularly wear a tank top on Christmas. That's not an unusual event where I'm at.
Where are you at?
Southern U.S.
Southern U.S.
Yeah.
Can you give me another state? You don't have to say what state you're in.
Like Georgia, Tennessee.
Oh, you're in the South. Yes, you said that.
I'm in the South. Yeah, that's what I mean when I said Bible Belt when we were talking last week. Like, I'm in the South in the big cities, they make jokes about us.
You have like sermons that take 5-6 hours in church, like Sunday.
Yeah.
Church
is that's a big part of. I'm excited about the topic, but I do want to wait for Andrea about the political homelessness, because it really resonates for me growing up in such a far right, really cultish kind of isolated, rural, fundamentalist Christian environment, and the values I learned as a young girl in that, and how that juxtaposed with what I learned in college. I got very, very lib femme. I went all the way. I always say my mom was the black sheep of the family, but then I came along and I was the psychedelic sheep, and they didn't know what to do. I was punk rock. I shaved my head. I was into all this experimental art. And now looking back as an older woman, I see the continuity between the two. I thought they were these two separate things. Like, I was leaving the far right and I was going to the left, and it was two different things. But now I see that it was really a lot of the same dynamics, a lot of the same values and tactics and strategies. And I've started to see and watching, these culture wars that are kind of going on, and I've like stepped back from it, and it really is like two denominations to me. Like, I can see the religiosity on the left side. I wrote a little while you were talking. I was trying to write down my thoughts about the billionaires and just the way that we just casually, it's like the kings, right? Like, what if instead of saying the billionaire, we said, well, the king or the masters?
Yes.
Because what is that amount of money if not like the owners, right? The people who own us. The way that we view homelessness where I am, and in the US, it's a problem in general, like you said. And the amount of space that is wasted and hoarded, the hoarding is absolutely insane. And where I am in particular, it's very cutthroat. It's very old school. I always say where I'm at, all this progress stuff, like the good old boys are just sitting back with their feet up going, that's funny. We run everything just like we always did 100, 200 years ago. We call it different things, but those power structures are there. And like you said, if you're down on your luck, I'm sorry, you didn't pray hard enough.
Where's that Christian charity?
Recently, there's been this whole thing at my work. So I'm a dishwasher at a little diner, very like low wage, bottom of the barrel, because I wanted to do something that I just could kind of like not be too invested in. And I like the place, I like the people who work there. But there's been this whole drama about there's been some homeless people hanging out by the dumpsters or coming and using the outlet or the water spigot outside. And he has to run them off and tell them that they're stealing electricity from him.
Yeah.
And then luckily I missed it. So yeah, I'm rolling my exactly, Merle. And they're like, you can't take the trash out by yourself anymore. We have to go in twos because there's homeless people around. And I'm like, yo, I'm not as scared as you of homeless people. I don't. But the boss actually like brought his gun out last week. Luckily it was before I got there, but I got there at 7 a.m. and one of the cooks came out and was telling me they got the guns out. I said, oh, they called the police? She said, no, he brought it out from the office. And I said, where are you going? I'm coming with you. And I said, Tammy, if I see a middle-aged white man carrying a gun, I am hitting the floor. I watch the news. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But this is I'm like, oh, I love living in the South because everybody in the restaurant just acted like it was totally normal. They were more scared of the homeless guy sleeping by the dumpsters than of our boss, just John Wayne over here. Yeah, it's funny.
You know, when I want to cry, I watch a good episode of John Kinson-Jones's What Would You Do? Where they have all these scenarios with actors playing out different, topics. Most topics goes, my liberal way. They help the women who are being, verbally abused by her husband and so on and so forth. But then you have the homeless guy that comes in for a meal that he has money for because someone has given him money to spend, and pretty much everyone is okay with him being rejected, not even being allowed to take a takeaway from the restaurant because he's homeless. That episode is on YouTube. What would you do? I don't need to hold people's hand. You can just look it up. That is so heartbreaking, knowing that the level of disdain for someone who is homeless is that high. Again, I'm using the word hardwired, but I think it's a good way to say that this is not something that is individual and structured. This is what we are being taught, that it's okay to differ from people to people. And just saying that, somehow how you're contagious. Just that we have so many perceptions about someone who lives in a house or who lives in a flat and for people being homeless. And it's despicable. It truly, truly is. But we need to recognize that it is the billionaires and millionaires who are pointing to as immigrants. They're pointing to homeless people. They're pointing to people of low income, saying that they're the real problem. Not me killing people all over the world just so I can gain more money. I think that I want to do a podcast on how the media narrative is driven to support that vision. We are not doing working class media anymore. We're not doing, real, what I would say is real people media. So the problem is now we have people like me, people who are low income, working, low income jobs that are identifying more with millionaires and billionaires than they do with the low income neighbor, because it has other race or ethnicity or whatever you want to call it. That is a narrative that has brought us here, I think.
And that's the crazy thing, right? They look at the person down on their luck and like, could never be me. They look at Elon Musk and they're like, maybe one day.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we can talk about all these practices that the rich do with the insane levels of consumerism, the private jets, the private islands, stealing people's water, getting kids, through surrogacy, like paying impoverished women to carry their babies, then pawning them off to nannies, not even raising those kids themselves, busting unions, Jeffrey Epstein and all the people on that spectrum.
Funding the worldwide sex industry they spend a lot of money. We know how much money goes through that. That's what the people with money, the men with money, are spending their money on.
That's a hobby. That's not their proper job. They always have a job on the side. Sex industry, who billions of dollars they can make, that's a hobby.
I'd like to come back, Merle, real quick to something that you mentioned that stuck with me. You said people in Sweden are kind of notorious for not helping because they themselves are very poor. Everybody's poor. And so kind of everybody is going like, I don't have much.
Historically poor. Not now, historically. Yeah.
Well, the community that I come from is similar. It's very tough. You know, the attitude is you've got to survive this and you've got to get smart to survive it. And if you made those bad choices, that's tough. I'm sorry, we can't help you. And the people who do get just a little bit, when you get out of that, because it's almost like tied into morality, it's almost like they feel like they did a moral good by surviving and maybe even thriving. I would say a lot of times lucked out, married well. That happens a lot. All of my aunts, my mother, they were all married at 16. So they feel like, I did something good to get this because I had to drilled into my head. These are the virtues. These are the good things. And if you didn't do those good things, you get what you deserve, right? Even if they don't frame it that way, even if they don't say it like that, that's the underlying feeling is like when people, especially maybe people who historically haven't had, so it's like built into the culture, this really tough attitude about self-sufficiency and hard work and not being a drain on your community. But then when people kind of get out of that a little bit, they retain those values, and it degrades those who don't luck up. The majority of women, I look around and I'm friends with a lot of the women I went to high school with, and they're all in the same boat with kids, with problematic, I would say abusive, but I have a pretty low bar for what I consider, men's abuse to women. They're all in the same boat, but we're supposed to believe that it's because of the bad choices they made. That there's not something bigger going on, I guess.
We touched on that point a few times, and I was thinking this earlier, and it applies again. I think this pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality that is sold through lots of people in lots of context. The haves tell that to the have-nots. It comes up in the prostitution debate all the time, right? The pro-prostitution people often tell women, the goal is professionalization. Take another course on how to better advertise. Take another course on how to be a better dom. Take another course on self-defense, and then, it'll all get better. While at the same time doing this, like, disjointed lip service to Marxism and socialism. That happens a lot on the left. Like you put these like radical symptoms to the front, but actually when you look at what the programs that people do, it's a lot of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, really neoliberal stuff. And that's not to like, I actually don't have this black and white view of that, political movement that no one ever helped anyone. And then, I know they sometimes do sensible things. On the whole, there is this narrative of, if you come out of prostitution traumatized, then you didn't have the right constitution or you made bad choices. That comes very much from that movement, but you're so anti-stigma. Why are you doing this? We can do a whole episode just about this, like just analyzing the literature where they say these things. Like for all the supposed group solidarity, there is a lot of, the technical term, right, is hierarchy, right? Like I'm the successful escort and you are the failure and who was in the wrong job, and now you're talking about being a survivor and trauma. Don't make it difficult for the rest of us. So that's a whole episode in of itself. I'm sure that'll happen one day.
Yeah, I'm sure too. And I'm looking forward to it. And I'm trying to see if I can sum up. We've talked about so much. I think that we need to look at the society. Olof Palme said, he was the Swedish prime minister who got murdered in the 80s. He was great in a lot of things. And he said, the society is human-made. We created it, so we can fix it. I truly believe that we can fix a lot of this problem, but we have to kind of look at it as a murder board from, the movies when they have all these different things. We need to solve so many things. We cannot discuss the empowerment or flourishing of women without addressing the patriarchy, the classism, the racism in some point, but also the common ground that we have as women. I think that is so important. And to identify that We have in Sweden, we have a lot of, help organizations. We have put off pretty, a huge sum of money. If you look back from 1999 till today, pretty much none of it goes directly to help women in prostitution or girls in prostitution. Everything goes out to fund people from the middle class who wants to do social liberal work on very thin education, sometimes none, and no interest in being educated. What they do is they put out stations where they have some therapists and you can come and talk. That's not helpful if you need a home. That's not helpful if you're in an abusive relationship. And I would actually say that without proper trauma training, that is not helpful for someone in trauma to go to some uneducated person with an interest and unearth all this trauma to someone who does not have the education to actually see you through it. We should look at, in Sweden, I'd say, how much money is actually going to help women and girls, not just support works for the middle class. I'm not going to be popular by saying this because I do have a lot of work and a lot of good friends working like this, but I have been very open to them when it comes to this. I see the world changing. It looks like it's getting worse, and it is getting worse. But what's good with the world getting worse is that, as we said, more and more people from the middle class are starting to opening up their eyes now for the system. And I don't know if I'm going to be alive to see it, but I know that in the near future, people will be fed up with being part of the have-nots and seeing people suffer when there really is no need to it. So that's what I want to say. If we want to have security, if we want to have proper medication, proper trauma treatment, we need to look at society as a whole. We cannot pinpoint just this issue and this issue and solve that one. We have to solve it all together.
Yes.
And I think that it's going to have to be us women doing it, because the men, I love them to pieces, but they are useless when it comes to solving problems. I'm sorry, but look, everything that's happened is their fault. And if you want to talk to me about that, you can come see me in my Instagram account.
Catch me outside. Merle, I love what you just, I want to end it on a positive note, what you're saying about the trajectory of this and women having to open their eyes and having to see and the next generation. So my youngest daughter just turned 16. I just watching them become little adults has been so fascinating, and I'm so proud. And I the way that she talks to me about her conversations with her friends, especially around sexuality and gender, and the way that she spots boundary nudging behavior and stops it in its tracks, the way she stands up for other girls her age. I told her about this podcast. They know my history. There's been a whole family outing, and we have a lot of healing to do in our family about it. But she immediately perked up and she was like, "Oh, can you send me some episodes? Can I listen to it? Can I?" And she's so excited about being educated, really, about she knows. I can see in the way that she handles herself, the way that she talks about her peers, and the way that she sees her peers, behaving and thinking. She knows she's a little ahead of the curve, she can spot these patterns in her own life and put a stop to them. And it's really exciting, right? And I love ending it on that note about these young girls and the education that they're going to get that we didn't get, the guidance that they're going to get, that, just having it out in the air, having the conversation. We're going places.
We hope you found this episode informative. To follow us on social media, click the links in the show notes below. If there is a topic you would like us to cover, you can contact us at redlightexposé.podcast@gmail.com or head on over to our website, redlightexposé.com. There you can also find a donation page if you'd like to support the show. All the hosts at Red Light Exposé are volunteers, so we rely on your donations to continue to compensate our survivor guests and cover operative costs. Thank you for listening. We hope you tune in next time.